Добрый вечер.
Good afternoon. Please.
Ваш визит в Китай...
Погромче, пожалуйста.
Константин Панюшкин, Первый канал.
Speak up.
Ваш визит в Китай носит беспрецедентный характер. Вы работаете
visit to
уже 4
China
дня.
is
За это время
unprecedented.
много
You've
раз
been working
виделись с
for 4
председателем
days
Си.
now.
Как вы
You've had
оцениваете
several meetings
результаты
with President
российско-китайских
Xi.
переговоров? И
What is
что
your
самое
assessment of the
главное
results
за
of
вот этот
the
многодневный
Russian-Chinese
визит?
talks, and what is the key outcome of this
Он
visit?
действительно многодневный, как вы сказали.
Yes, it is a
Связан с тем,
visit
что
that
все-таки
spanned
здесь было
several
несколько
days,
мероприятий, и мы когда
due to
планировали
the fact that
эту работу,
there
и
were several
спланировали ее
events
таким
here,
образом, построили,
and
чтобы не было
we
необходимости
planned
несколько раз
our
перемещаться
activities so that we won't have to make several long trips.
трехсторонняя встреча.
We had the SEO summit, we had the trilateral meeting between Russia, Mongolia, and China,
Визит в саму
and
Китайскую Народную Республику.
the visit to
И
China
можно сказать,
itself.
что вот такой формат работы
And
он
I can
позволяет
say that this
говорить
format
не только за столом переговоров,
has
но
allowed
что
us
самое главное, позволяет
to
в
not
неформальной
only
обстановке
have a discussion
многократно
at the negotiating
встретиться
table,
и
but
в
also
неформальной уже
to
абсолютно
have
дружеской
a number
атмосфере
of
поговорить
informal
на
meetings
любую тему, которая
to meet
представляет
and
взаимный
talk
интерес. И это
informally
очень
about
важно
the
и
things
очень полезно
that are of
оказалось.
interest to all
Что
of us.
касается
And it proved to be very
результатов в
useful
плане
in this regard.
позитивными, на
And
мой
as to the
взгляд,
outcomes, I believe that are
документы,
very
которые
positive.
были приняты,
The
причем
documents
приняты всеми
that were
участниками, они нацелены на будущее.
adopted
Я бы в
by
этой связи
all of the
отметил
participants are
особо
very forward-looking, and
китайскую
I
инициативу
would
о глобальном управлении. Мне
emphasize the
кажется, что это
Chinese
очень
Global
своевременно,
Governance
и
Initiative. I
что
believe it is very
важно,
timely,
эта
and
инициатива направлена на
importantly,
позитив
this
в
initiative
работе между теми
aims to
странами,
provide a
которые собрались
positive
на саммит
momentum
в Китае, и
in the cooperation between the
нашими
countries
возможными партнерами
present at the summit in China,
среди стран, которые
and
на
also
сегодняшний
our
день
partners
не желают заявлять о этом партнерстве.
of,
Вот все это вместе
and the
и
countries that do not wish to
такое
uh,
единство всех
claim
собравшихся,
partnership
это
as of now.
очень важная демонстрация
So,
позитивного
a key
настроя
principle
и
that is observed
уверенность в
among
том,
all
что мы
the
сможем
participants here
достигать
is
заветных целей.
a positive sentiment and a confidence that we'll be able to reach our goals.
Владимир Владимирович, да. Прости. Лана Самсония, Интерфакс. Я хотела продолжить тему
Interfax.
вашего визита в Китай, но по поводу двусторонней
Talking
повестки.
about the bilateral
Был подписан
agenda,
солидный пакет
during
документов
your
по
visit to
итогам вашего
China,
визита. И, наверное, в первую
I know
очередь,
that a
документы,
package of
связанные
bilateral
с
documents were signed as a result, and it included documents on the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. And this was a key topic in the top-level discussions agenda in recent times and an indicator of Russian-Chinese relations on the global stage. Do you believe that the agreements that have been reached will essentially put an end to the speculation about Russian-Chinese relations and attempts to interfere in the relations and try to influence them from external actors? Well, to be honest, I don't really understand what you're talking about, because I'm constantly involved and immersed in my work, and I don't have any time to be distracted by these kind of rumors and speculations that you may be meaning. Now, we have met with our partners, we have had many discussions, there are various options that we considered, all with their benefits and disadvantages. And despite the fact that there is a recession in many countries, such as the leading European economies, still the global economy is moving ahead, especially in the Asia-Pacific. And energy demands are growing, and that includes the Chinese economy, which is still one of the locomotives of global economic development, over 5% growth. And that growth is from a good baseline. And even though there had been a small reduction, the 5% that we're seeing now is better than the 5% that we saw some years ago. And we're seeing increased demand for energy resources. Now we have we'll finally have a consensus among the parties that had been engaged in the talks, and it's not charity from either side. We're talking about mutually beneficial agreements based on market principles, and those market principles are relevant in this specific region, and the energy prices involved are shaped not based on the prices of today, but rather on a specific formula that is calculated based on objective factors and market considerations. So there is objective demand, there are concrete capabilities and supply capacities, and there had been a years of work from both sides and from various economic actors, and of course it will bring economic advantage and competitive advantages to our Chinese friends, because they will receive the product at a weighted and balanced market price, not at an increased premium price like we're seeing in Europe. And it's also reliability of supply. And everyone is satisfied with that. And Gazprom is a leading company. It's now expanding to new markets. We'll have 50 billion through Mongolia. Now we have 38. And then we'll have a couple of additional routes, all to expand the total volume. And all in all, it will be over 100 billion cubic meters of gas.
Добрый вечер. Павел Зарубин, телеканал «Россия».
Russia TV channel. You often speak about the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict, when Ukraine was dragged into NATO, and now we see that European leaders speculating about security guarantees for Ukraine are almost exclusively concentrating on deploying their troops in Ukraine, and many of them are still insisting on Ukraine's accession to the European Union. But we see that the European Union, that used to be an economic association, is now turning into a military political bloc with constant aggressive statements and decisions. How can you comment on this situation? I concur with those who say that every country has the right to choose how to ensure its security. And it's true for every country, including Ukraine. But it also means that no country can ensure its security at the expense of another country, such as Russia. We always opposed the idea of Ukraine becoming a member of the North Atlantic Alliance, but we never doubted its right to engage in its economic activities in any way it likes, and that includes EU membership. Life. Now, the question is, Russia and the United States are discussing peaceful settlements, and the formula of security guarantees and exchange of territories is being peddled around. Now, what is meant, and by that, who should be the guarantor, who should be taking part in elaborating these guarantees? And this is very meaning in meeting Zelensky right now. Can any agreements be reached at such a meeting? What was the first part of your question? Well, there is a speculation right now that there is a formula of security that proposes exchanging security for territories. No, this was never discussed in such a form. Security guarantees is a natural thing, and we have always assumed that every country must have security guarantees and a security system, and that includes Ukraine. But no territory exchange is assumed here. And we're not fighting for territories, we're fighting for the rights of people who live in the territories, for the rights to speak their own language, to practice their culture and traditions that were passed down by their previous generations. So that is what we're talking about, first of all. And if those people choose through democratic electoral procedures, through referendums, to be part of the Russian Federation, we must respect this decision. That is democracy, something that those who are forgetting that should remember. Now, the first articles of the UN Charter also directly mention the right of the peoples to self-determination. But we have never linked security guarantees to territories. Now, one can say these are related topics, but we never discussed that in a package, and this was not the way it was discussed in Anchorage. As to potential meetings with Mr. Zelensky, now, I already said that I've never ruled out such a meeting, but whether this can be meaningful. In accordance with Ukrainian constitution, now there may be different opinions about this, but you can just go and read the actual text of the constitution. There is no way to extend a president's term. There is no tool in the Constitution to do that. After you serve your 5 years as president, your time is over. There is a provision that says that under martial law, elections shall not be held. That is true. But it doesn't mean that the president's term is prolonged. His term runs out, and his authority is passed down to the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, including his authority as the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. So what should the current government do if they want to be legitimate and take part of the settlement process? They should hold a referendum in accordance with the Ukrainian constitution. Any kind of territorial issues are resolved through referendums, as far as I remember. But you cannot have a referendum under martial law. That is also enshrined in the Constitution. In order to hold a referendum, you should lift martial law. But as soon as you lift martial law, you'll need to have elections. And this process can be dragged out forever. The outcome of the elections is unclear, but whatever result you have, you will have to obtain an opinion of the Constitutional Court, according to the law. And if you want to have an opinion of the Constitutional Court, the procedure is, if the Constitutional Court is requested to prolong the authority of the President and the Constitutional Court refuses to do that, what can you do? Now, the thing they did in Ukraine, the security guards declined to allow the judge of the Constitutional Court to access his workplace. That is how they did it. And I don't know where he is currently located. I know that there was a time when he left the country. And recently, the term of service of some of the Constitutional Court judges ran out, so there is no quorum. And if we meet with the current head of administration, let's put it this way, it is possible, I never rule this out, if the meeting is well prepared and if it leads to a positive potential outcome, it is possible. And by the way, Donald asked me if it's possible to have such a meeting, and I said that it is. After all, if Zelensky is ready, he can come to Moscow. This is quite possible.
Andrei Kolesnikov, Commerce and Newspaper, good afternoon. Do you believe that multipolar world about which you have been speaking during the famous Munich speech back in 2007. A new pulse of this multipolar world are probably Russia, India, China. So has this multipolar world been established, or there is still something to aspire for? And a couple of hours ago, German Chancellor Merz called you probably the biggest war criminal of our times. What do you think about this? It happened a couple of hours ago, literally. As for if the multipolar world has been established or not, well, its outlines are there, by and large. But I wouldn't really speak about any domineering pose. It doesn't mean that this new multipolar world should have any hegemons, because no one is speaking about this, not in BRICS, not in the SCO. Everyone has equal rights in this multipolar world. And from international law point of view, everyone must have equal rights, must be in the similar position. Yes, there are economic giants like India or China, and actually our country is among top 4 biggest economies if we speak about the purchasing power parity. These are the current realities. That's not something that we would like to have. That's what international organizations calculate, but it doesn't mean that anyone should dominate over the politics or over global security. So we do not believe that there should be some domination. Everyone must be equal. As for the statements that you've just mentioned, because Mr. Peskov has mentioned this just literally 10 minutes ago. So what do I think about this? I think that it's a bad attempt to lift the responsibility for the tragedy that is happening in Ukraine now. What do I mean? I would like to remind you, and I have already said this on many occasions, back in 2014, ministers of 3 European countries traveled to Kiev and signed a document that was basically an agreement between the sitting president, then President Yanukovych, and the opposition. And in accordance with that agreement, all the disputes, all the political disputes were supposed to be resolved in the constitutional field, by peaceful means, by legal means. And then, literally on the next day, a coup d'etat took place, a bloody coup d'etat, a violent coup d'etat took place. And no one lift a finger to bring the situation back to the constitutional field. That's how the conflict started, because right after that, those events in Crimea happened. Right after that, the Kiev regime started hostilities with the use of armored vehicles, with the use of airplanes against those territories of Ukraine who did not agree with the outcomes of the coup d'etat. And after that, they dismantled and they undermined all our attempts to resolve the situation via peaceful means, and they refused to implement the Minsk Accords. So then who is to blame for this tragedy? Those who ignored the interests of Russia in the field of security? If someone thinks that you can ignore the people of our country in such a way, they must remember that Russia will never just watch by idly what's happening next to its border and not react to anything. This will never happen. So please, the next question. Good afternoon, Olga Skabeva, Russia TV channel. We hear more and more from Europe about the need to seize our funds, $300 billion, and to give it to Ukraine. Yes, there are still those who believe that that's not a nice thing to do, it's not a safe way to do, but there are still those who are pushing for this theft. So what do you think about this? And another important question about the special operation. Mr. Putin, is there a chance that in the nearest future it will be over? So how do you feel it? Is it coming to conclusion? I will start with the second part of your question, I believe, because it's a key part of your question. Back in 2022, we proposed the Ukrainian authorities to treat the choice the people living in the east of Ukraine with respect, to withdraw troops from there and to put an end to this conflict immediately. And I have to say that overall they did not reject that proposal outright. But after they were pushed by our Western European, after we were pushed by our Western European partners to withdraw troops from Kyiv, the situation changed. So they said, we are going to fight until the end, so either you will break our neck or we will break yours. So that's how it was put. Maybe it was put even in some more blunt terms. So it's either you or us. And it still goes on like this until now. Nevertheless, I still believe that if common sense prevails, then an agreement on acceptable way to put an end to this conflict, it is possible. And since we can see the sentiments in the U.S. administration under the leadership of Trump, so we don't hear just mere statements, so we see the sincere desire to find a solution. And I believe there is the light at the end of the tunnel. So we will see how the situation develops, how it unfolds. Well, if not, then we will have to accomplish our goals via military means. And what about theft of our assets? Well, the theft, we have already commented on this many times. I don't think I can say anything new. You said someone wants to take it, someone doesn't. The smarter ones, they don't want to. This is true. So this is not me being ironic or sarcastic, so I'm not trying to attack those who are not that smart, because the smarter people who are in finance or in the economy, they understand that it's going to ruin, it is going to destroy all the international economic principles, and it is going to deal a huge damage to the global economy, to the world finance, because as it is in many countries of the world, people are creating alliances that are trying to develop economic development within these regions in isolation. And if that happens, then this kind of separatist economic movement will be enhanced, and the global order, global economic order will collapse.
Добрый день, телеканал «Звезда».
Good afternoon, Zvezda TV channel.
Могли бы вы поделиться последней информацией об обстановке?
Could you share the latest information about the situation in the special military operation zones? What reports do you receive from the commanders, and how the situation has changed on the battlefield? Well, all the groupings of the Russian armed forces, in all directions, we are advancing successfully. Well, the pace, the rate at which we are advancing it varies. I'm not going to list all of those groupings or directions. If you are from the Zvezda TV channel, you must be aware of all of it. As for how does the adversary react to that, they are trying to fill the gaps, they are trying to deploy troops to critical areas, from one critical area to another that they deem more critical. If I remember it correctly, just recently, I need to check, of course, but we are in Beijing, not in Moscow. But nevertheless, if we speak about Sumy, they deployed the 95th Brigade to another area. Is it a better deployment for them, Sumy? No, they just replaced another unit, and they deployed the 95th Brigade to the area that they deem more important. And the same happens along the entire front line. So they are just redeploying troops from one part to another. We must not get complacent because they might be training some reserve units to maybe to launch some operations of their own, but the preliminary analysis from our military experts, it shows that the Ukrainian armed forces do not have these capabilities. They are not capable of large-scale offensive operations. They are only trying to defend the front line that they have. And the example that I cited is not the only time it happened. It is happening along the entire front line. And it proves, it is an evidence, and not only our experts believe that, the Western experts also believe that the Ukrainian armed forces have a deficit of reserves, and military-capable units are staffed at 47–48%, and that's almost the critical line. But nevertheless, the hostilities, armed conflict is a difficult thing, it is a violent thing, so we must not try to predict anything, but if we speak about the analysis, so this is how it is. Good afternoon, Igor Zhdanov, RT. Mr. President, going back to Alaska, after you landed on the red carpet, right away you started talking to the U.S. President, to Donald Trump. After taking a photo, you got into a car with him and you continued talking to him there. What did you discuss there? What language did you speak? Maybe some details of that conversation. Of course, we spoke English. Well, broken English that still that I still have. So my vocabulary is very limited, and I told him during the press conference, "I'm glad to see you, dear neighbor." I told him in English. I'm glad to see you alive and healthy. And in the limo, so the ride took some 30 seconds, so it was more of a small talk, really. And did you talk to Narendra Modi? Well, it's not a secret. To him, I told about the negotiations in Alaska. Just wait a second, hold on. Yes, please. What was the question? A question about culture. Well, everyone here is cultured enough. One of the milestones of this year is the release of the Red Silk film, and you told President Xi about this during his visit in May, and you mentioned this to an interview to the Xinhua agency. Are we going to have more projects like this, and did you have a chance to watch the film, so maybe you could share your impressions? It was the idea of President Xi, actually. We attended one event, and I noticed that it is very difficult for our filmmakers to enter the Chinese market. So he smiled, and he said, so let's make joint films, let's make joint projects, and then the market will be open for you. And that was true, so it was one of the first attempts to do that. I know that today or tomorrow the film will be released here, and from what I heard, the film is quite popular and people enjoy watching it. And of course,
вам интересно, можете у министра культуры, у Любимова спросить.
You can ask Culture Minister Lyubimova. He will give you more detailed information about the plans that we have in this regard. But from what I know, it is happening already. The work has started on other joint movie projects. And it's a really good path to enter this huge, enormous Chinese market, which is very attractive.
Владимир Владимирович, если позволите, продолжим тему кино. Вот сейчас на Западе вышел фильм, где один из персонажей, фильм называется «Кремлевский волшебник». Видели ли вы этот фильм? Показали вам кадры. Вашу роль, кстати, исполнил британский актер Джуд Лоу.
You may know about him. Well, I haven't seen the film and I haven't even heard about it, so I cannot comment as of now. Then I have a different question. You mentioned health. And there was a short video circulated in the media where you're discussing longevity with the President Xi. Well, what exactly do you mean? Well, do you believe that people can live 150 years or longer? Yes, when we walked the parade, President Xi mentioned the subject, and I remember that Mr. Berlusconi used to talk about this a lot. Yes, modern medicine has various means, including surgical means, organ replacements, and all of that creates hope that active living will go on for much longer than today. That we will see people live longer. And I don't remember what year it was, but I think it was about 1950. But there was some UN data that by 1950, by 2050, there will be more people aged at 65 plus than 5-year-old children, and that is something that we must consider. The social and economic consequences of that is something to be mindful of.
Да, спасибо. Скажите, пожалуйста, возвращаясь все-таки к
Going back to
программе вашего визита,
the topic of your visit and the program of your visit. This SEO summit was probably one of the biggest in SEO's history. What is the role of the organization in today's turbulent world? And will the SEO become a political alliance that will be able to counter threats emanating from the West? The SEO is not meant to counter anyone. It's not its idea to be against anyone. And I want to emphasize that during our discussions, during our bilateral meetings over these 4 days, we never had any kind of confrontational rhetoric. Everything here is geared towards a positive kind of approach. We never think about how we can outplay someone, how we can score a win against someone. It's not that kind of competition. We think about how we can organize our own work better and how we can make joint efforts to get better results. That's it.
Владимир Владимирович, скажите, пожалуйста, вот сейчас
Mr. President,
19-й пакет санкций готовит
and
Европа,
now
и она угрожает,
Europe
собственно,
is
уже не
preparing
нам, а
the
нашим партнерам.
19th package of
Как вы к этому
sanctions,
относитесь?
threatening
Вот
not only
вы
us but our
разговаривали с
partners
огромным
as
количеством
well.
членов ШОС и
You've had
партнеров,
conversations
которые
with
серьезно
many
коснутся, в частности, той
SEO
же самой
members and
Индии
partners that
и
could be
Китая.
affected by this, including
Что они
India and
думают по этому
China.
поводу, как
What do they
мы
think
можем
about
на это
this?
реагировать,
How
и
can
кто
we
от этого, на ваш
respond?
взгляд, больше пострадает?
And who will suffer the most? How do you think? Well, surprisingly enough, we almost didn't mention this in our conversations because it's not really something that concerns us. Because the Ukraine and the situation is only a pretext to take various steps against countries who have economic ties with us. There is a trade disproportion between the United States and India or with China, but there is no situation between Brazil and the United States, for example. And by the way, Brazil faced additional tariffs on the 6th of August, even though the deadline was 8th of August. So what does Ukraine have to do with this? Nothing. It's only about domestic politics, including with the relations between the current president and the previous president, Bolsonaro. Ukraine doesn't have anything to do with that. So, of course, there is some imbalance in trade, but I believe that those should be addressed through negotiations. We just had a long and detailed consultations with some of our partners, and with some of those partners we also have trade imbalance, which is not in our favor. And what we're trying to do is to arrive at an idea of what we can offer and what they can offer to us, so that we can work together and find solutions to our problems. And we're seeing success. With one of our partners, we've managed to increase supplies from that country by a factor of 3. And so we are just working patiently until we arrive at a solution. Then you have countries like India, almost 1.5 billion people, China, with powerful economies, but they also have their own domestic political mechanisms and laws. So when somebody tells you that they're going to punish you, you have to think, how can the leadership of those countries, of those big countries, which had difficult periods in their history too, that had to do with colonialism, with attacks on their sovereignty during prolonged periods of time, you have to understand that if one of them shows weakness, his political career will be over, so that influences his behavior. Just the colonial era is now over. They have to realize that they cannot use this tone in speaking with their partners. But ultimately, things will be sorted out, everything will take its place, and we will see a normal political dialogue again. We suggest that you ask the last question. Okay, a question from the girl over here. Now, you said that you're ready to elevate the representation level from the negotiating group with Ukraine. Could it be Belousov, Minister of Defense? Could it be Ushakov, presidential aide? Who could it be? And what is your opinion about the current negotiating group led by Medinsky? Well, I am happy with Medinsky's work. If there is a need to elevate the representation level, to increase it in terms of political status, we could do that. I will not name any names right now, but we are prepared to elevate it to a serious political level. What matters is the result. The things our negotiating team is currently doing, led by presidential aide Mr. Medinsky, I believe is a good example of a reserved and professional approach. Yes. Please.
Нет,
про него.
дело в том, что я хотел с вами поговорить про
I
работу Стива Уиткоффа. Дело в
wanted
том, что сейчас на Западе против него начался целый вал критики очень
to ask a question about
со
Steve
стороны
Witkoff.
и
There's a lot of
СМИ,
criticism
и политиков.
from media
Его
and
обвиняют в том, что
politicians
он
in the
неправильно вас
West.
понимает на переговорах,
He's
что он
being accused
неправильно
of
передает
misunderstanding
президенту
you
США Дональду
during the
Трампу
talks,
содержание
that
переговоров
he
с вами, и что,
relates the
цитата,
information
он
from you
слишком
to Donald Trump
симпатизирует России.
incorrectly,
Вот как бы
and
вы
that,
оценили его
I
работу?
quote,
Спасибо.
that he has sympathies for Russia. What is your assessment of his work? Well, assessing the work of someone who works for the President of the United States is not my job. It is the job of his employer, President Trump. And I'm convinced that Mr. Witkoff conveys the information in this context with me and with other members of the Russian leadership that originates from the US President, not anything else. And our talks in Anchorage showed, it was clear from the context of our talks, that information is relayed quite correctly. Our position is conveyed to the US leadership is completely clear to me, and it's something that I saw during our discussions in Alaska. Because the things that we discussed with Mr. Witkoff, all of that was fully confirmed in the presence of President Trump, and he had nothing to say against that. There are many difficult issues, but all of that was true. So I believe that those critics of Witkoff just dislike the position, but they also dislike the position held by Trump. That's the thing. You can have different approaches to reaching a settlement. There are those who say that you should fight to the last Ukrainian, and then there are those like the representatives of the current US administration and the US President himself, who are trying to reach a solution using peaceful means. So the first category of people, the war party, is always attacking the peace party. And the rest is just speculation and insinuations and attempts to make one's position seem stronger. That's it. I already talked about this. Even before the parade today started, President Trump commented on the parade, and he said that he hopes that President Xi will remember American soldiers who helped China during World War II. And he wrote, it's unclear whether that was sarcasm, that he should send his best regards to President Putin and Kim Jong Un as they conspire against the United States. Well, President Trump has a sense of humor. It's well known, and we are on first-name basis, and I can tell you, and I hope that he will also hear this, that strange though it may seem, but throughout these days, both during informal and formal talks, there was not one case when anyone voiced a negative opinion about the current US administration. Not once during these 4 days. All of the people that I talked to supported at the meeting that we had in Anchorage, and they all expressed hope that the position held by President Trump and the position held by Russia and all the other parties will lead to an end of this conflict. So that is something that I'm saying without any kind of irony. And since I'm saying this publicly and everyone in the world will hear this, it is a direct confirmation of the fact that it's true, because all of those people will hear me. And of course, if this was a lie, then I would look bad in front of my strategic partners and all of my interlocutors over these days. And another thing I wanted to say, going back to what your colleague said earlier, SEO's activities and SEO members' activities are not aimed against anyone. They're aimed at finding new ways and better ways of developing our own countries and taking our people forward.
РИА Новости, Ольга Самсонова.
РИА Новости, Olga Samsonova. Mr. President, we have heard some statements regarding Russia from Baku. And how do you assess the current state of the relations between our two countries? What happened between us, and how can we establish dialogue? You wanted to ask one question, and you asked 4 questions. I'd like to be brief in this regard. Oh, you know, considering the current situation or political expediency, there are certain issues. But today we greeted each other with President Aliyev, and I greeted his wife. We exchanged a couple of words. I believe that fundamental relations between Azerbaijan and Russia and mutual interest towards developing these relations will put everything in its right place eventually.
Valentin Alfimov,
Komsomolskaya Pravda. Mr. President, we speak a lot about peace in Ukraine today, about certain agreement with Trump, about Europe's opinion, about what Ukraine is afraid of, but the most important thing has not been raised. You receive reports from the battlefields regularly, and we know that you talk to the commanders in the trenches, with the soldiers there. What do they speak about peace? Are they ready to accept ceasefire, accept the agreement that might be reached, or they insist on going until the last, until the victory? The vast majority of them, I would like to emphasize this, the vast majority of them, they want Russia to accomplish all the goals that were set out when the special military operation began, and the rest is of a secondary importance. How it will be accomplished? Well, the best option is by peaceful means. So we have suggested this idea a lot of times. We will see how it will continue to unfold. Mr. President, it could go on for a very long time like this. Well, lazy bones here. He doesn't want to do his job. Mr. President, Alena Nefedova is Vestia newspaper. At the Anchorage summit, you suggested that Mr. Trump traveled to Moscow and to have a summit there. So is this summit being prepared? Maybe there is some agreement in this regard. Maybe there is a timeline. No, there is no set date, so the summit is not being prepared, but the proposal is on the table. Mr. President, Lyudmila Alexandrova, Moskovsky Komsomolets, you're saying that Russia and China stand for fair world order that is based on the global majority. Under the current global system, global world order, what is unfair and what mechanisms can help to resolve this? Well, unipolar world is unfair, it's obvious, and we are developing our relations not based on the opinion of the majority, but based on the idea that we are developing our relations, our cooperation based on the idea, and the idea is that the world must be multipolar, which means that all the actors of international communication, international relations must be equal, and there must be no one more equal than the others. And unipolar world must cease to exist, and it's in the interests of those and in the interests of the peoples of those countries whose authorities still are trying to defend this outdated system. And I would like to conclude with this. All the best. Goodbye.